Wealthy white families claiming Pocahontas ancestry were accepted as white. But actual Native Americans who had documented tribal connections and community ties were rejected and reclassified as Black or colored. So if your last name was on this list, your Native ancestry claim was not only rejected, your birth certificate was now changed from Indian to colored. He believed that the Native American tribes in Virginia had intermarried with Black people generations ago. Therefore, anyone who claimed to have Native American ancestry, he said, was actually mixed race Black trying to pass as Indian to get around segregation laws. This was his theory. He called them mongrels. He called them near whites sometimes. He said they were striving to pass, and he made a list. This is a real document. It's called Surnames by Counties and Cities of Mixed Negroid Virginia Families Striving to Pass as Indian or White. The state of Virginia started reclassifying these people as colored. Not Native American, colored. The onus is on you to prove that you're white. Which is, and I cannot stress this enough, that is impossible. It was impossible to prove this. Suddenly these families had a big problem because the law said 1 drop of non-white blood makes you not white. So are the Randolphs not white now? Are Virginia's most powerful families about to be barred from marrying other white people? Are their kids going to be kicked out of the good schools? Are they going to be buried in colored cemeteries? No, of course not. That's why the Pocahontas exception exists. People want to say in the comments all the time, you Americans, you're obsessed with race. Why are you so obsessed? Dude, we're not obsessed with race. This is written into our history, and then it wasn't taught. I'm so serious about this. It's a hit list of family names. Oh, why are you guys so obsessed with race? Look at this freaking document. Hi, I'm Danielle Romero. Thank you so much for being with me here on my channel where we talk about American identity and family stories. And before we jump back into this video, if you'd like to join me over at Patreon, get off of YouTube, we can direct message, we can chat. It's patreon.com/NYTN, or you could send me a coffee at coffee.com/NYTN13. Are you white? Legally white? Are you legally white? In 1924, the state of Virginia decided to settle this question once and for all because it is not a simple question and not a simple answer legally with a new law. And the law said if you had even 1 drop of Black blood, and we're talking 1 ancestor, at least 5 generations back, you were Black. Period. End of story. Unless you can prove that you were related to Pocahontas. Yes, the Pocahontas. Then you're fine. You're white. Carry on. I'm serious. Virginia wrote this exception into their racial purity law specifically for people who could trace their bloodline to a 12-year-old Powhatan girl from the 1600s. This is going to get real wild. It's going to get real wild. So before we keep going, let me know where you are watching this from. I'd love to know what state you're from or what country you're from and how many people we have from Virginia in particular, or maybe if you have Virginian ancestry. So this wasn't just a weird footnote that nobody was paying attention to. You know, sometimes laws get put into place and like they're just packed into other stuff and nobody knows. No. This exception destroyed families, but it also saved some families. It created an entire underground industry of genealogists who would, for the right price, discover that yes, you definitely had the Pocahontas connection. Don't worry about it. And this also meant that in Virginia, your legal race could change overnight based on which story your family could prove. Today, we're going to talk about the Pocahontas exception, how it worked, who it protected, who it destroyed, and how DNA testing 80 years later, you know what happens if people start taking these tests, revealed that most of the people who used it were lying the whole time. Let's get into it. So, November 14th, 1924, small town in Virginia, Rockbridge County, up in the Shenandoah Valley. Really pretty area. I've been to this area before. Mountains, farms, just like small town vibes, so nice. So a woman named Atha Sorrels walks into the county clerk's office. She's there to get a marriage license. She wants to marry a man named Robert Painter. Maybe they grew up together, maybe their families knew each other. It's like a 5-minute process. You fill out the form, you pay the fee, boom, you're done. So the clerk's name is A.T. Shields. Shields looks at Atha's application, then he looks at her, Then he looks back at the application. He's like, no, 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 no. Not like come back tomorrow or like I'm about to go to lunch. Just no, no. So Atha thinks there's been a mistake. Maybe she filled out the form wrong. Maybe she missed something. So she's looking it over and she's like, well, what's wrong? What did I miss? And A.T. Shields, the county clerk, tells her he has, quote, reason to believe that she's not of a pure white race. Like, let's let that sink in. This random county bureaucrat, this random clerk, decided based on something that Atha Sorrels was not white enough to marry a white man. So we don't know what that something was. Maybe someone in town gossiped about her family. Maybe there was a rumor that was floating around. He saw the last name. Or maybe Shields just did not like her appearance. Okay, maybe she got a little too much sun that day. The law did not require the clerk to explain that feeling. He didn't need evidence, actually. He didn't need to hold a hearing. He was just able to just say, no, denied. And if A.T. Shields could decide that you weren't pure white, your marriage to a white person would be illegal. I've covered this on my channel a lot last year. There's a ton of videos about this whole time in the United States. Not that long ago, only 101 years. Now, if A.T. Shields decided that you weren't white, then if you married a white person, not only was it illegal, it was felony illegal. You go to prison. So Atha's sitting there in this office, thought she's like bride-to-be, can't wait to get married, probably now in complete shock. And Shields slides a piece of paper across the desk to her, okay? He says, you can appeal this. You can take me to court. She has 30 days. So Atha Sorrels hired a lawyer, and she sued the county clerk. I have the actual petition to show you, and I can leave a link to it. Atha Sorrels versus A.T. Shields, clerk petition for mandamus, November 14th, 1924. So she's taking the small town government employee to court for just the right to get married. The right to get married. And to understand why this is happening, why she had to prove her racial purity to a county clerk, we have to talk about the laws that made this possible. So quick context. So I've done deep dives on Virginia's 1924 Racial Integrity Act before. I did them a year ago. I can link to those videos if you want that. But this is what you need to know right now for this story. Virginia's law said you couldn't marry a white person if you had any trace whatsoever, this is without a DNA test, of non-Caucasian blood. Not a significant amount, not a noticeable percentage, just any. So if you have one ancestor that goes back 6 generations, that is enough. That's the one drop, right? The clerk did not need to prove this, though. You had to prove that you didn't have it. Okay, the onus is on you to prove that you're white. Which is, and I cannot stress this enough, that is impossible. It was impossible to prove this. You are asking someone to document every single ancestor going back 200, 300 years without the internet, maybe without even a means to travel across to the next town, to their library, their records, no DNA tests, right? No internet forums, no hopping on Facebook to message someone. And you're going to prove that not one of your ancestors had a single drop of non-white blood. Think about this too. Like there were so many times where libraries would be burned to the ground. Courthouses get flooded. People didn't keep perfect genealogies, right? What are you supposed to do, right? This is an impossible situation. But that was your burden of proof. You had to prove a negative across centuries of history or you couldn't get married. Unless you qualified for the exception. There's always an exception, right? This case goes before Judge Henry W. Holt, Circuit Court of Rockbridge County, Virginia. Judge Holt, from what I can tell, is from he's a fairly typical Virginia judge in 1924, which means he's probably not going to be our hero here. And sure enough, he starts his ruling like this. Quote, I am in cordial sympathy with the general purpose of the statute. Whether it be based upon pride, prejudice, or instinct, we look upon ourselves as a sceptered race and stand for its preservation and all its integrity. Okay, racist, obviously, 1924 Virginia, we're not shocked. But then he writes, but the statute in judgment goes far beyond anything that has heretofore been enacted. So translation here, he's like, actually, this law is insane even by our own standards. Then Judge Holt does something I genuinely did not expect when I was reading this document. He explains in detail why this law is unenforceable nonsense. So this is a direct quote. I could put this on here for you guys. I'll link to it. He said, quote, in 25 generations, so 25 generations of ancestors. So for you to your parents, that's one generation. So we're going really far back. One has 32 millions of grandfathers, not to speak of grandmothers, assuming there's no intermarriage. Half of the men who fought at Hastings were my grandfathers, he says. Some of them were probably hanged and some knighted. Who can tell? Certainly in some instances, there was an alien strain. I think he means like foreign strain. Beyond peradventure, I cannot prove that there was not. So here the judge is doing math. Okay, he's like, okay, there's like millions of ancestors going back this far. So if you go back 25 generations, you have a bazillion ancestors. And he's saying, I, Judge Henry W. Holt, sitting judge in Virginia, cannot prove that all of these ancestors were racially pure. Nobody can prove that. And then he writes this document. Quote, Alice never got herself into a deeper tangle. So he's comparing Virginia's racial law to Alice in Wonderland. A sitting judge in 1924 just called the state's flagship racial purity law. Crazy, upside down world. But there's more. He doesn't strike down the law. He can't because he's a circuit court judge. He's not the Supreme Court. He doesn't have that authority. But what he does do is he points out an exception. The law says you can't have any trace of non-Caucasian blood except, and this is the text of the law, except if you have 1/16 or less the blood of American Indians. So Judge Holt looks at Atha's evidence. She brought 130 years of family records. I don't know how this woman did it. Birth certificates, marriage license, family Bibles, whatever she brought, buried in there. And she says, actually, there is a small amount of Native American ancestry, but it's under 1/16. So she qualifies for the exception. Judge Holt writes, quote, the license should issue. She wins. She gets to marry Robert Painter. But here's what Judge Holt doesn't say in his ruling. Here's what he's not mentioning. Who is that exception really for? We have to rewind 300 years. 1607, Jamestown, Virginia, first permanent English settlement in North America. You know the story, right? Or at least the Disney version, that's wrong. John Smith, Pocahontas, Colors of the Wind, like that whole thing. I always loved that movie as a kid, at least the beginning part. The second part scared me. But the real story is actually way darker, way more complicated, way less musical. But that's not what we're here for today. What we're here for is what happened after that. So in 1614, Pocahontas, whose real name was Matoka, by the way, and people pronounce that differently, converted to Christianity. She took the name Rebecca, and she married an English tobacco planter named John Rolfe, not John Smith. I know it's very sad if you've only watched the Disney movie. It was John Rolfe. They had a son named Thomas Rolfe. Thomas survived into adulthood. He had kids, whose kids had kids. Here we go. By the 1800s, some of the wealthiest and most powerful families in Virginia were claiming to be descended from Pocahontas and John Rolfe. The Randolphs, the Bowlings, the Branches, the Lewises, these were the first families of Virginia. Old money, political power. These people ran the state. Every state has these families, right? And for 200 years, being descended from Pocahontas was a flex. This was exotic, it was romantic, it proved your family had been in Virginia since literally in the beginning, right? So now you have a claim to this land. A claim, I'm putting in air quotes. It showed you had that frontier spirit. You're connected to the land, like you belong here. But then, March 1924, Virginia passes the Racial Integrity Act. Suddenly, these families had a big problem because the law said 1 drop of non-white blood makes you not white. And these families had been bragging about having Native American blood for 2 centuries. So are the Randolphs not white now? Are Virginia's most powerful families about to be barred from marrying other white people? Are their kids going to be kicked out of the good schools? Are they going to be buried in colored cemeteries? No, of course not. That's why the Pocahontas exception exists. The law was written with a specific carve-out. If you had 1/16 or less Native American blood, 1/16 is not a lot. This was called the Pocahontas Clause. And yes, so this is what people literally called it. It was designed to protect these families, but it gets twisted, believe it or not. So because the first families of Virginia We're having genealogists document their Pocahontas connection. And you better believe they had genealogists on the retainer, right? There were still Native American communities living in Virginia at the time. I'm not going to be able, I never say the names right, so please correct me. But the Monacan people, the Pamunkey, the Chickahominy, the Mattapony, these people documented tribal ancestry, people whose family had been in Virginia for thousands of years, not 300, thousands, right? The state of Virginia started reclassifying these people as colored, not Native American, colored, like black. Same or more Native blood, now classified as a completely different legal race. People want to say in the comments all the time, you Americans, you're obsessed with race. Why are you so obsessed? Dude, we're not obsessed with race. This is written into our history, and then it wasn't taught. And so a lot of us, including me, we are kind of shining a light on stuff that's been hidden for 2 generations, 3 generations, and we're shocked, but not really, right? Now, why would these people be colored, not considered Native American? Well, because of one man, Walter Plecker. We did a video on him, actually a lot. So I'm not going to get too deep into it, but Walter Plecker ran Virginia's Bureau of Vital Statistics from 1912 to 1946, so right during this time. And he was in charge of every birth certificate. He was overseeing it. Death certificate, marriage license, like he's doing all that stuff. And he had a theory. He believed that the Native American tribes in Virginia had intermarried with black people generations ago. For anyone who claimed to have Native American ancestry, he said, was actually mixed race black trying to pass as Indian to get around segregation laws. This was his theory. He called them mongrels. He called them near whites sometimes. He said they were striving to pass, and he made a list. So this is a real document that I've shared a bunch of times. It's called Surnames by Counties and Cities of Mixed Negroid Virginia Families Striving to Pass as Indian or White. I'm so serious about this. It's a hit list of family names. Oh, why are you guys so obsessed with race? Look at this freaking document. This is a real document. Now, maybe your family history was very different than mine, but my family at this time did fit in this list. They did fit in this list. And a lot of our history, a lot of our stories, even our last names were changed, lied about, not passed down to me. And I'm now, as a mother, trying to piece together as much as I can about my family story because of stuff like this. So like this has real world impact. And even if it didn't impact anyone who's alive today, do we just not study history because it doesn't impact the guy sitting next to me on the bus? Like, that would be ludicrous. But like, how much more should we study it if it's impacting the guy who's sitting next to me on the bus, right? So Plecker sent copies of this list to every county clerk, every school registrar, every hospital, every draft board in Virginia. So if your last name was on this list, your native ancestry claim was not only rejected, your birth certificate was now changed from Indian to colored. And I know I'm going to get in trouble for this. If you've been on my channel for more than a year, you know that I've had demonetized videos, flagged videos from YouTube. Those are 2 different things. Also banned videos for using the word colored, because my great uncle, my Uncle Danny, who I've interviewed on here, his birth certificate says colored, and other family members too, and I've shared those documents on here. And you're not allowed to use that word. Apparently, it is as bad as the F word, according to YouTube. I'm for real. And, you know, it just really burns me because I see such trash on YouTube. I see literally pornographic material sent to people. People are using that. Actually, just absolute trash. And I'm just like, here's a document from my family that says colored. And YouTube's like, nah, nah. And you can see here, like, not a lot has changed. So if your name was on this list, if your last name was on this list, you're roasted. Like, your marriage could be annulled. Your kids could be removed from their schools. You couldn't be treated at white hospitals. Like this, I did a video on the guy who was the head of the NAACP and the story of his father. He had been hit by a car and he had to be brought further away to a non-white hospital where he then passed away because he was not able to be treated at this other hospital. I mean, this is all serious, serious consequences. So I want to be absolutely clear about what's happening here first. Wealthy white families claiming Pocahontas ancestry were accepted as white. But actual Native Americans who had documented tribal connections and community ties were rejected and reclassified as Black or colored. Possibly the same amount of Native blood, more Native blood, but completely different outcomes. So the Pocahontas exception was not protecting Native heritage. It was protecting specific families. And if you couldn't afford a genealogist to fight Walter Plecker, if you didn't have the documents, you were cooked. There's nothing you could do. So what do you do when your entire life, maybe your marriage, your kids' education, your job, where you can live, where you can be buried, depends on having the right kind of ancestry? You get creative. So between 1924 and 1967, I just have to pause there. My mom was born 1961. Okay, again, this is recent. A whole industry sprang up around the Racial Integrity Act. So genealogists who specialized in finding, or let's be honest, creating family trees that would satisfy Walter Plecker and his clerks. So now we're manipulating documents. Now, some of this was legitimate research. People would dig through courthouse records for you, go through the old family Bibles, letters, wills, trying to figure it out, but some of it was less legitimate. And so a lot of these genealogical records, though, from the 1600s, 1700s, are kind of a mess because the British burned Richmond during the Revolutionary War, so records are gone. Then the Civil War happens, more records are gone. And sometimes the records that survived were just like not that great or they're flat out wrong, right? Because census takers in the 1800s would just guess. They look at you and they're like, okay, you're mulatto here, you're white here, you're Indian here, you're Black here. This has happened in my family over and over and over again. Like, not even a question. My great-grandmother was born in Louisiana, 1900. Her census, when she was 10, she was mulatto, but her parents were both censused as Black 10 years before she was born, and then later censused as white. And parts of that family have also been censused as colored or Indian. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense, right? So which one's true? Well, whichever one the government needs to be true, right? The Pocahontas bloodline was already a mess. So you couldn't even say, well, I'm gonna take this exception. Because Thomas Rolfe, the son of Pocahontas and John Rolfe, had one daughter, Jane Rolfe. Jane married Robert Bowling. They had one son, John Bowling. Then he had 6 kids. That's it. 6 kids. I say that's it. 6 kids. That's a lot now, but it wasn't back then. But from those 6 kids, by the 1920s, there were hundreds of families descend from Pocahontas. That's a lot of people claiming a very narrow bloodline. And were they all telling the truth? Probably not, right? But who can check? How do we check this? Walter Plecker was too busy harassing all of the other families to audit every first family's genealogy. I say first family, the big important Virginia families. This is where the law becomes truly perverse because the Pocahontas exception was supposed to be about blood quantum, remember 1/16, about biology and percentages, which like, how do you figure that out? But in practice, it was just about paperwork. I've said this a bazillion times on my channel. American identity is paperwork. It's bureaucratic. That's what it is. And so if you had the right documents or you could create them, you were now white. The end, right? But if you didn't have them, you weren't. It's like so bizarre. It's so bizarre to me. So Atha Sorrels won her case because she did come up with 130 years of documentation and she could afford a lawyer and most people couldn't do that. So some families had to make impossible choices. Maybe you moved to other states where the laws were different. My family certainly did that a bunch, or less enforced, or you changed your names. My family did that too. Some families cut ties with relatives who couldn't pass. Sadly, mine also did that. Just stopped talking to them. Pretended they didn't exist, started a new life, disappeared into whiteness and never looked back. Literally, that is the reason I started this channel, looking for my family story. Finding Lola is my docuseries. It's a 4-part series, but I've also put a new version up that's just all 4 parts together. It's like an hour long. Going to Louisiana, trying to find my great-grandma Lola's story and who we really were. Some families disappeared into whiteness and never looked back. But some families did the opposite. They gave up trying to prove that they were white or Native American and they disappeared into blackness because then at least they could stay together. This law stayed into effect till 1967. That's when Loving versus Virginia, I'm sure you know this court case, the Supreme Court case that legalized interracial marriage, finally struck down the Racial Integrity Act. But it did not end this. It did not end this. The damage had been done. Some families have been split for generations. Communities have been destroyed. People died not even knowing their family story. But then there's always more. In 2000, something happened that revealed just how absurd this whole thing had been. DNA testing. So in the early 2000s, genetic genealogy became accessible to the public. You could send in a cheek swab or spit in a vial, pay $100, and find out where your ancestors supposedly came from. And the researchers started testing people who claimed to descend from Pocahontas. The results? Most of them did not have it. The bowling line, that narrow, well-documented line from Pocahontas and her great-grandchildren, turned out to be way less widespread than people had thought. So some families who had been rejected by Walter Plecker, who said they were lying about their native heritage, who were reclassified as Black, turned out to be telling the truth. So by the time that the DNA testing came around, it was too late. So families have been separated, right? Communities are scattered. Maybe people lived out their whole life on the wrong side of a color line that was drawn based on paperwork that turned out to be false. Virginia did not apologize for the Racial Integrity Act until 2001. I was in high school when they apologized. Yeah, I'm not old. I'm turning 40 in a couple months. 2001. That's like 24 years ago, 25 years ago. Like, what? So some of the people who reclassified under that law are alive now. Their kids are alive. Their grandkids are growing up right now, like me here, dealing with family trees that do not make sense because someone 3 generations ago got kicked out or got ties cut just to survive. The Pocahontas Exception was not about protecting Native ancestry or heritage. It wasn't even about biology. It was about protecting people in power. Guess what? That's every law. Like, I am so politically done. Like, I do not trust anyone at this point. And I don't know how we could have in the first place. Just look at our history from just a little while ago. If you are wealthy and connected, you can claim Pocahontas and stay white, even if you didn't have the ancestry. It's not even about being white that's so important. It's that everything that came with that, right? The freedom to just choose your own adventure. But if you were poor and had no connections, your actual documented, maybe DNA now DNA confirmed ancestry, how'd you be classified as Black or colored? Same blood, different story, different life. This was a sorting mechanism, a way to decide who got to keep their power and who got pushed out. And that's why I say in this channel a lot, I really don't think that this is a left-right issue. I don't think it's like a Democrat-Republican issue. This is not even a black-white issue, I'm going to tell you that. This is about the people who have all of the power and the money, very few of them, and the rest of us. Like, there's so much infighting going on right now, and we should be sticking together because they don't want us to see that dichotomy. All the primary documents I showed you today are linked in the description, and if I forgot to list them, please let me know. But this is public record. This is history. I guarantee you it's not in your history books. If you want to go deeper on the Racial Integrity Act and see some of the work I've done using primary sources on that, I got full videos on it. I'll leave that playlist at the end. Let me know what you think. Otherwise, we'll talk soon.